The storm had passed by morning, leaving the coastal town washed clean and strangely quiet. The sea no longer roared. It only breathed, slow and heavy, as if exhausted from the night's fury. Fishing boats lay tilted against the pier, their ropes tangled like nerves after a bad dream. Windows were dark. People here learned early not to rush out after storms. Things always surface later. Elena heart-woke before dawn, the way she always did after heavy weather. The wind had rattled the old guest house all night, and even now the walls seemed to remember it. She lay still for a moment, listening.
No rain.
No wind. Just the distant cry of gulls and the muted rhythm of waves breaking against the rocks below the cliffs. She rose quietly so as not to wake her son. Leo had crawled into her bed sometime after midnight, frightened by the thunder. His small hand was still curled into her sleeve, warm and trusting. Elena carefully freed herself, tucked the blanket around him, and stood. From the kitchen window, she could see the harbor. Gray light stretched across the water, turning everything flat and unreal. The lighthouse at the edge of the bay blinked once, then went dark, its duty done for the night. Elena poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, letting the bitterness ground her. That was when she noticed something on the shore. At first she thought it was driftwood. Storms carried all sorts of things into the cove, broken crates, torn nets, once even a piano bench. But this shape was wrong. Too symmetrical. Too still. Elena set the mug down and grabbed her jacket. The path down to the beach was slick with wet leaves and seaweed. She moved carefully, boots slipping on stone, heart beating faster with each step. The closer she got, the clearer it became. A man lay near the waterline, half on sand, half on rock. His clothes were soaked and torn, expensive fabric ruined by salt and grit. One arm was twisted beneath him at an unnatural angle. His dark hair was matted with blood. Elena stopped several feet away. "Hey," she called, her voice sharper than she felt. "Can you hear me?" No response. She knelt beside him, pulse loud in her ears, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. They're weak, but there. Relief washed through her so fast it made her dizzy. The man stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. His eyes were a striking gray, pale and unfocused, like glass pulled from deep water. He stared at her as though she were the first thing he had ever seen. "Don't move," Elena said quickly. "You've been hurt." He frowned, as if trying to understand the words. His lips parted. "Where?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than breath. "You're in Briar Cove," she replied. "There was a storm last night. Do you remember what happened?" He closed his eyes again, then shook his head slowly, as if the motion hurt. "I don't remember anything." That answer sent a chill through her. She glanced back toward the path. The town clinic wouldn't open for another hour. The nearest hospital was 2 hours away, inland. She could call for help, leave him here and run, but the tide was already creeping closer, water licking the edges of his coat. She made a decision she would later pretend had been inevitable. "My name is Elena," she said, sliding her arm under his shoulders. "I'm going to help you up. Can you stand?" He hesitated, then nodded once. Getting him to the guest house was slow and awkward. He leaned heavily on her, taller and heavier than she had expected, his body tense as if every movement sent pain shooting through him. He said nothing, only breathed through clenched teeth, eyes fixed on the ground as though afraid it might disappear. Inside, Elena settled him on the old couch by the fireplace and fetched towels, dry clothes, water. Leo padded into the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, then froze. "Who's that?" "Someone who needs help," she said gently. "Go get dressed, okay?" The man watched the exchange with quiet intensity, as though the child's presence anchored him to something real. "Do you know your name?" Elena asked, handing him the glass. He stared at it, then at his hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time.
"No."
That single word landed heavily between them. She called the clinic as soon as it opened. The nurse promised to send someone later in the morning, weather permitting. Until then, Elena cleaned the cuts on his forehead and hands, working carefully, aware of his eyes following her every move. "Thank you," he said after a long silence. "You don't owe me anything," she replied, though she wasn't sure she believed it. When she left the room to make breakfast, she felt his gaze linger on her back, not intrusive, not hungry, just searching, as if he were trying to memorize the shape of safety. By the time the sun fully rose, the town had begun to wake. Doors opened. Engines coughed to life. Someone shouted down the street. Elena stood at the sink, staring out at the calm sea, unease coiling quietly in her chest. She did not yet know who the man was, or why he had been left to the mercy of the storm. She did not know that somewhere far away, people were already noticing that he had not returned. All she knew was that the quiet life she had carefully rebuilt had shifted, subtly but irreversibly. And nothing, not the sea nor the storm, would ever be the same again. By noon the town had fully shaken off the storm. Briar Cove returned to its usual rhythm, slow and deliberate, as if time here moved differently than anywhere else. Elena could hear the harbor again, the clank of metal, voices of fishermen, the low hum of engines. Normal sounds, reassuring sounds. The man on her couch remained very still. Dr. Moore from the clinic arrived just after 11, bringing with her the smell of antiseptic and damp wool. She examined him thoroughly, asked questions that led nowhere, shone a light into his eyes, tested his reflexes. No obvious head trauma, the doctor concluded, straightening. Concussion is possible, but the memory loss could be psychological. Shock does strange things to the mind. "So he'll remember?" Elena asked. "Maybe. Maybe not." Dr. Moore glanced at the man. "How do you feel?" He considered the question carefully. "Confused," he said at last. "Tired. Like I woke up in the middle of someone else's life." That answer made the doctor pause. "You'll need rest," she said finally.
No alcohol. No exertion.
"If the headaches worsen or you lose consciousness, call immediately." After she left, the house felt smaller. Elena brewed more coffee and set a plate of toast on the table. The man hesitated before eating, as if unsure whether he was allowed. "You can stay until you're better," she said, almost without thinking. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. "At least until we figure out who you are." He looked up, startled. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," she replied a little too quickly. "I have a spare room." That wasn't entirely true. The guest house had been half empty since autumn. Tourists preferred summer, when the water was warm and the town pretended to be lively. But the room was there, and so was her sense of responsibility. She had found him. That mattered. Leo studied the man from across the table, curiosity winning over caution. "What's your name?" he asked bluntly. The man opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know," he admitted. Leo frowned, thinking hard. "You can borrow one," he declared. "When I didn't know how to spell my name, Mom said it was okay." Elena smiled despite herself. The man glanced at her. "Is that true?" "Sometimes," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then call me Evan. For now." Evan. The name settled into the room easily, like it had always been there. The rest of the day passed quietly. Elena did laundry, cooked soup, answered emails from guests canceling reservations because of the storm. Evan slept for hours, exhaustion finally claiming him. When he woke, the sun was already dipping toward the horizon, painting the walls gold. He wandered into the kitchen, moving carefully, as though afraid the floor might vanish beneath him. "I had a dream," he said. "About what?" Elena asked, chopping vegetables. "I don't know. It was more like a feeling." He rubbed his temples. "Running. Wind. And something behind me." She did not press him. That evening they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the sea. Leo fell asleep against Elena's side, his head heavy and warm. Evan watched them, his expression unreadable. "You're not afraid," he said suddenly. "Of what?" "Of me." Elena considered the question. "I should be," she said honestly. A stranger shows up on my beach with no memory and no explanation. It's not exactly reassuring. But you're not. No, she agreed. I'm not. He looked away, out toward the dark water. You shouldn't trust people so easily. Trust isn't easy, she replied. It's a choice. That night Elena lay awake long after the house had gone quiet. She told herself she was listening for Evan's movements, for signs of distress. But she knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was a tension in the air now, subtle but persistent, like the pressure before another storm. Over the next few days, Evan grew stronger. He helped with small tasks, insisted on carrying firewood, fixing a loose shutter, sweeping sand from the porch. His hands were steady, skilled. Not the hands of someone who had spent his life behind a desk, Elena thought, though she had no idea why that mattered. People began to notice him. Mrs. Lang from the bakery asked questions Elena answered vaguely. A fisherman named Cole lingered a little too long at the gate, eyes narrowed. In a town like Briar Cove, strangers were not invisible. Evan noticed too. I don't want to cause trouble, he said one afternoon. If you want me to leave. No, Elena interrupted, more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. You're not trouble. He searched her face, as if trying to understand something unsaid. That night, the power went out. The wind rose again, sudden and fierce, rattling the windows. Leah woke crying, terrified by the darkness. Elena lit candles with shaking hands, her old fear of storms resurfacing despite years of pretending it was gone. Evan was there instantly, kneeling in front of Leo, speaking softly until the boy's sobs slowed. He carried him back to bed as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When he returned to the hallway, Elena was standing there, candlelight flickering across her face.
Thank you, she said.
For what? For being here. The words hung between them, heavier than either expected. For a moment neither moved. Then the wind howled again, closer now, and reality rushed back in. Elena stepped away, suddenly aware of how near he was, how warm. They said goodnight and retreated to their separate rooms. But sleep did not come easily. Evan lay staring at the ceiling, images sliding through his mind, flashes of metal, voices shouting, a sharp pain that made him gasp. Somewhere, far away, something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. And in the quiet guest house above the restless sea, two lives continued to drift closer, unaware of how little time they had before the past came looking. The first sign that the past was catching up with Evan came quietly, almost politely. Elena noticed it in the way he froze one morning while tying his boots. His hands stopped mid-motion, fingers clenched around the laces as if they no longer knew what to do. Evan, she asked. He blinked, looked up at her, and forced a smile.
Sorry.
Just lost my train of thought. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. That day he grew restless. He paced the shoreline, staring out at the horizon, then wandered toward the cliffs where the lighthouse stood. Elena watched him from the porch, unease settling in her chest. She told herself she was being foolish, that everyone had off days, that memory loss did strange things to a person. Still, she found herself listening for his footsteps whenever he left her sight. He returned near sunset, pale and quiet. There's something familiar about that lighthouse, he said as they prepared dinner. I don't remember being there, but my body reacts to it, like it's seen it before. Do you want to go? Elena asked. He hesitated. Not yet. The next morning brought visitors. Two men arrived in a dark SUV, its polished surface absurdly out of place among the salt-stained trucks and bicycles of Briar Cove. They parked near the harbor and stood for a long moment, surveying the town like hunters studying unfamiliar terrain. Evan saw them first. His entire body went rigid, a reaction too fast and too intense to be coincidence. Who are they? Elena asked, following his gaze. I don't know, he said, but his voice was tight. And I don't want to. They didn't come to the guest house that day. Instead, they spoke to people, casual questions at the pier, a brief visit to the clinic, a stop at the bakery. Elena heard about them from Mrs. Lang before she saw them herself. Looking for someone, the older woman whispered, flowers still clinging to her hands. Didn't say who. Didn't feel right. That night, Evan barely slept. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were sharp and violent. He saw flashing lights, felt hands grabbing his arms, heard a woman's voice close to his ear, sweet and cold at the same time. He woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, heart hammering. Elena was at his door, almost immediately. "It's okay," she said, sitting beside him. "You're safe." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to sink into that simple sentence and let it erase everything else. But fear lingered, stubborn and deep. "I don't think I'm a good person," he said suddenly. She stiffened. "Why would you say that?" "Because whoever is looking for me, they're not fishermen or tourists." He swallowed. "And because my body remembers things my mind doesn't. How to watch exits. How to measure distances. How to expect violence." Elena said nothing for a long moment. "People are more than their worst moments," she said at last. "Even if you did something terrible, it doesn't erase who you are now." "Doesn't it?" he asked quietly. The men came the following afternoon. Elena was hanging laundry when the SUV rolled to a stop outside the gate. The taller of the two approached first, his smile practiced, his eyes cold. "Good afternoon," he said. "We're looking for someone." Her heart thudded painfully. "There are a lot of people in this town." "Yes," the man agreed. "But only one we're interested in." Evan appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. The man's gaze snapped to him. Satisfaction flickered across his face before he smoothed it away.
"There you are," he said.
"You've caused quite a bit of trouble." Evan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Elena without seeming to do so. "I don't know who you think I am," he said evenly. "Oh, we know exactly who you are." The second man spoke now, his voice amused. "You just don't know it anymore." "Leave," Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. The men exchanged a glance. "We will," the first said. "For now." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But you should know, he doesn't belong here. And when he remembers why, neither of you will sleep peacefully again." They left as abruptly as they had come. Elena stood shaking long after the SUV disappeared down the road. That night, she locked every door. "I should go," Evan said. "No," she replied immediately. "I'm dangerous," he insisted.
"To you."
"To Leo." "You haven't hurt us," she said. "And you won't." "You can't know that." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the resolve in her eyes. "I know who you are here," she said. "I know the man who helps my son with homework, who brings in firewood, who wakes up from nightmares and still chooses kindness the next morning. That matters more to me than whatever someone else says." Something broke in him then. He reached for her without thinking, stopping just short of touching her face, as if afraid to cross an invisible line. "If I stay," he said hoarsely, "everything will change." "It already has," she replied. They stood like that, breath mingling, the unspoken heavy between them. Neither kissed the other. Neither stepped away. Outside, the sea rolled endlessly on, indifferent and patient. And far from Briar Cove, plans were already being rewritten. Someone had found him. And this time, they would not make the same mistake twice. The town changed after the men in the dark SUV appeared, though no one spoke of it openly. Conversations grew shorter. Glances lingered longer. Briar Cove had always been wary of outsiders, but now that wariness had teeth. Elena felt it when she walked Leo to school, when she stood in line at the market, when she passed neighbors who had once greeted her with easy familiarity. Something was wrong, and everyone sensed it. Evan sensed it most of all. He stopped going to the lighthouse. He stopped wandering the cliffs. Instead, he stayed close to the house, repairing what didn't need repair, stacking firewood that would not be burned for months. His movements were controlled, deliberate, as if he were preparing for something he could not yet name. At night, his dreams worsened. Elena heard him pacing long before dawn, the the quiet creak of floorboards betraying his restlessness. When she finally rose and found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, she knew sleep had abandoned them both. "They're not here just for me," he said without looking up. Elena poured coffee, hands steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. "What do you mean?" "I think someone wants me erased," he replied.
Not retrieved.
Not questioned. Gone. She sat across from him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Why?" "That's the part my mind won't give me," he said bitterly. "But my instincts are screaming." As if summoned by his words, a sound cut through the morning air. Not a car this time. Something heavier. Something deeper. A helicopter. Elena rushed to the window. The aircraft was distant, a dark shape moving along the coastline, slow and deliberate, not the careless path of a tourist flight. Evan stood instantly, his face drained of color. "That's not rescue," he said. "That's surveillance." The helicopter passed, disappearing beyond the cliffs, but the silence it left behind was worse than the noise. By afternoon, Evan had made his decision. "I need to go back to the lighthouse," he told her. "No," Elena said sharply. "That's exactly where they'll look." "I think that's where it started," he replied. "Or ended. Either way, there's something there." She wanted to argue. She wanted to lock the door and pretend none of this was happening. But she saw it in his eyes. This was not recklessness. It was necessity. "I'm coming with you," she said. He shook his head. "It's too dangerous." "You don't get to decide that alone," she replied. "Not anymore." They left Leo with Mrs. Lang, inventing a flimsy excuse about errands. Elena hated the lie, but fear pressed it into her mouth. The path to the lighthouse was steeper than she remembered. Wind tugged at her jacket, salt stung her lips. Evan moved ahead of her, alert, scanning the rocks and horizon as if expecting the world itself to attack. Inside the lighthouse, the air was cool and damp. Dust motes floated in thin shafts of light. Evan stood very still, breathing slowly, eyes unfocused. Then it hit him. He staggered back, gripping the railing as memories crashed into him with brutal force. Voices. Orders. The smell of fuel. The scream of metal tearing against stone. A woman's face again, beautiful, furious, determined. "I was supposed to die," he whispered. Elena caught him before he fell. "They betrayed me," he said, his voice breaking. "I trusted them." Outside, the sound of rotors grew louder. Evan looked at her sharply. "We have to leave.
Now."
They barely made it down the path before the helicopter swept over the cliffs, low enough that Elena felt the wind from its blades. It circled once, then began to descend toward the rocky clearing near the shore. They ran. Back at the house, panic took over. Elena shoved clothes into a bag, her hands shaking. Evan grabbed documents, tools, anything that might help. He moved with grim efficiency, the fog around him thinning by the second.
"They'll come here," he said.
"If they haven't already." As if on cue, tires crunched on gravel outside. Evan pulled Elena toward the back door. "Go to the storm cellar. Stay there no matter what." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. He cupped her face, his touch urgent, grounding. "Listen to me. If they take me, they won't stop. But if you disappear, they lose leverage."
She hated that he was right.
They barely made it into the cellar before footsteps pounded through the house. Voices echoed, unfamiliar and harsh. Someone cursed. Something shattered. Elena pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Above them, Evan's voice rose, calm and commanding in a way she had never heard before. A different Evan. A man shaped by power and danger. Time stretched painfully thin. Then suddenly, everything changed.
Shouts.
Confusion. Another helicopter, closer this time. Gunfire, not wild but precise. Orders barked with authority. Minutes later, the cellar door creaked open. Evan stood there, breathing hard, eyes bright with adrenaline. "It's over," he said. Behind him were men in uniforms Elena didn't recognize. their movements efficient, controlled. One of them approached Evan, gripping his shoulder with a familiarity that made Elena's chest tighten. "You're lucky," the man said. "Very lucky." Evan nodded, but did not look away from Elena. That night, after statements and explanations she barely processed, after Leo was returned to her arms and the house fell quiet again, Elena sat on the porch staring out at the dark sea. Evan joined her, careful, hesitant. "I remember who I was," he said softly. "And?" she asked, afraid of the answer. "And I don't want to be him anymore." She closed her eyes, letting the night air wash over her. The storm had come, and it had not yet finished with them. Morning arrived quietly, as if the night's violence had never happened. The sea lay smooth and deceptively gentle, reflecting the pale sky like a sheet of glass. If Elena had not seen the broken door, the scuffed floors, the deep marks left by boots that did not belong in her home, she might have believed it all a dream. But it wasn't. Evan stood in the kitchen, staring at his hands again. Only now his gaze held recognition instead of confusion. The man who had arrived on the shore lost and nameless was gone. In his place stood someone sharper, heavier, burdened by memory. Elena watched him from the doorway. He turned when he felt her there. "I should tell you everything," he said. She nodded. "I think I deserve that." They sat at the table where, not long ago, they had eaten soup and talked about nothing important. Now, every word carried weight. "My name isn't Evan," he began. "It never was. But I don't know yet if I want to say the real one out loud." "That's okay," Elena said. "You can take your time." He exhaled slowly. "I worked in private security. Intelligence consulting. The kind of work that doesn't exist on paper. When things went wrong, I tried to pull out. Someone decided that was inconvenient. And they tried to kill you," she said quietly. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "They'll keep coming," he added. "Not immediately. But eventually. Even if they fail, my past will always be close enough to touch." Elena felt a dull ache settle in her chest. "So, what happens now?" "I leave," he said, and the finality in his voice cut deeper than she expected. "It's the safest option."
For you.
"For Leo." Her hands clenched in her lap. "You don't get to decide what's safest for us without asking." He looked up sharply, then softened. "I know.
I'm sorry."
I'm just used to handling things alone." "You're not alone anymore," she said. That truth seemed to unsteady him more than any threat. Later that day, two of the men from the night before returned, this time in daylight. They introduced themselves properly, explained as much as they could. They offered protection, relocation, new identities if necessary. They spoke in calm, practiced tones that made Elena feel as though she had wandered into someone else's life. Evan listened, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When they left, he walked down to the shore and did not return for hours. Elena spent that time with Leo, answering questions carefully, trying to sound normal. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying Evan's words, the look in his eyes when he said he would leave. When he finally came back, the sun was setting again. "I can't stay here," he said without preamble. "Not long term."
Elena swallowed.
"I figured. But I don't want to disappear either," he continued. "I don't want to vanish in the middle of the night and leave you wondering." She looked at him, then really looked. The man she had come to know was still there, beneath the layers of history and regret. "What do you want?" she asked. He hesitated, then spoke with brutal honesty. "I want a life that doesn't belong to someone else's agenda. I want mornings like the ones we had. I want to stop running." She felt tears prick her eyes. "And me. I want you," he said simply. "But I don't know how to offer you anything stable." That night, Elena lay awake beside Leo, staring into the dark. She thought of the life she had built piece by piece after loss, of the calm routines that had once felt like safety. She thought of how fragile that calm truly was. By morning, she had made her decision. They stood on the porch, the air sharp with salt and autumn chill. "I'm not asking you to stay," she said. And I'm not asking you to leave. He frowned. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you not to shut me out, she replied. Whatever comes next, I want to choose it with you, not be protected from it like a child. He studied her face, searching for doubt. He found none. All right, he said at last. Then I'll tell you the truth. He told her about the woman behind it all. About betrayal dressed as affection. About contracts signed in shadows and promises broken with smiles. He told her about the guilt that had followed him for years, the line he had crossed that he could never fully erase. I don't deserve the life you offer, he finished. No one deserves love, Elena said softly. That's why it matters when it's given. They did not kiss then. They did not touch. The weight of what lay ahead demanded respect. That evening, as Elena tucked Leo into bed, he asked a question that made her breath catch. Is he going away? Not yet, she said carefully. Leo considered this. I hope he stays. He makes the house feel bigger. Elena smiled through the tightness in her throat. Later, Evan stood alone in the guest room, packing the few things he had accumulated. He stopped when he reached the small wooden shelf by the window. There, tucked behind a stack of old books, was a photograph he did not remember being taken. It showed the three of them on the beach, Leo laughing, Elena squinting against the sun, Evan standing slightly apart, as if unsure whether he belonged. He realized then that leaving would not erase this. Whatever choice he made, something permanent had already taken root. And the hardest decisions were still ahead. The decision to leave Briar Cove did not happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a wound reopening each time it seemed ready to heal. Evan stayed for another week. During the day, life almost returned to normal. Elena went back to her routines, walking Leo to school, opening the guest house emails, pretending the world had not cracked open beneath her feet. Evan helped where he could, repairing the fence the intruders had broken, replacing the shattered door, smoothing over the signs that anything violent had ever occurred. At night, the house felt different. They spoke more quietly, more carefully, as if afraid that words themselves might force a final decision into the open. Evan slept poorly again, not from nightmares this time, but from anticipation. His mind ran ahead of him, mapping exits, weighing risks, preparing for a future that did not include peace. Elena felt the distance growing even when he sat beside her. One evening, rain began without warning, soft at first, then heavier, drumming steadily against the roof. The sound wrapped the house in isolation, shutting out the rest of the world. Leo fell asleep early, worn out from the gray day. Elena and Evan sat at opposite ends of the couch, a space between them neither of them acknowledged. You've already decided, haven't you? Elena said at last. Evan did not pretend not to understand. I've decided that staying would be selfish. Her fingers tightened around her mug. And leaving isn't? He looked at her then really looked. Leaving hurts me too. She believed him. That was the worst part. You think danger follows you, she said. But it found you here anyway. It always does, doesn't it? No matter where you run. Yes, he admitted. Which is why I don't want it to touch you again. You don't get to sacrifice yourself to protect us, she replied quietly. That's not love. That's fear dressed up as nobility.
His jaw tightened.
I don't know how else to keep you safe. You let us choose, she said. That's how. The rain intensified, filling the silence. The next morning, Evan received the call he had been expecting. He stood on the porch, phone pressed to his ear, gaze fixed on the horizon. Elena watched from the kitchen window, her chest aching with every second that passed. When he came back inside, his expression was resolved. They want me back, he said. Not officially. Just available. And if you refuse? They'll keep circling. Watching. Waiting. He met her eyes. They won't stop.
So this is it, she said.
Yes. He packed that afternoon. Not much, he still owned almost nothing. Each item he placed in the bag felt symbolic, as though he were dismantling a version of himself piece by piece. Elena helped in silence. When the bag was zipped closed, Evan stood there awkwardly, hands at his sides. I don't know how to say goodbye, he admitted. Then don't, she replied. Say something else. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth, the steady presence she had come to rely on. I don't regret finding you, he said. No matter what happens next. Her throat tightened. Neither do I. They kissed then, not urgently, not desperately, but with the quiet intensity of people who knew exactly what they were losing. Elena pressed her forehead to his chest afterward, breathing him in, memorizing. Leo appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. You're going somewhere, he stated. Evan crouched in front of him. For a little while. Leo considered this seriously. Will you come back? Evan hesitated, then answered honestly. I don't know, but I'll try. Leo nodded, accepting this as children often accept difficult truths. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stone, smooth and pale. For luck, he said. Evan closed his fingers around it, emotion flickering across his face. Thank you. The car arrived just before sunset. Elena stood at the gate as Evan walked down the path, bag over his shoulder. He turned back once, lifting a hand in a gesture that felt painfully insufficient. Then he was gone. The house felt unbearably quiet after. Days passed. Then weeks. Elena learned how absence could be louder than presence. She caught herself listening for Evan's footsteps, reaching for an extra mug in the morning, turning to comment on something only to remember there was no one there to hear it. She did not allow herself to regret the choice. Regret implied a mistake. What they had shared was real, and that mattered. One evening, as she closed up the guest house, an envelope lay on the counter. No return address. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Evan stood in an unfamiliar place, city lights blurred behind him. He looked older somehow, harder, but his eyes were the same. On the back, written in careful script, were 3 words. Still here.
Alive.
Elena pressed the photo to her chest, tears slipping free at last. Far away, Evan stood on a balcony overlooking a city that never slept. The work had begun again, relentless and dangerous, but different this time. He set boundaries. He refused assignments. He said no. And every night, when exhaustion threatened to consume him, he took the smooth stone from his pocket and reminded himself why he was fighting to survive. The distance between them was vast, but it was not empty. Winter came early to Briar Cove. The sea darkened, the wind sharpened, and the town pulled inward, as it always did when the cold set in. Elena welcomed the routine. It kept her grounded. It kept her from counting days. Evan wrote rarely, but when he did, his messages were simple. He never spoke of danger, never described his work in detail. He wrote about weather, about cities that smelled like metal and rain, about moments of quiet stolen between obligations. He always asked about Leo. He always asked about the sea.
Elena answered honestly.
She told him about school projects, about repairs to the guest house, about storms that rattled the windows. She did not tell him how often she dreamed of him standing in the doorway, or how sometimes she still set out 2 mugs in the morning. Months passed. Then one evening, as the first snow dusted the cliffs, the phone rang. I'm done, Evan said. Her breath caught. Done with what? With running, he replied. With pretending this is temporary. She sat down heavily. What does that mean? It means I made a choice, he said. And now I need to know if I still have a place to come back to. Elena closed her eyes. She had imagined this moment in 100 different ways, none of them adequate. You never stopped having a place, she said quietly. He arrived 3 days later. The ferry horn sounded before she saw it, low and familiar. Elena stood at the end of the pier, Leo bouncing beside her, heart pounding so hard she feared it might betray her composure. When Evan stepped onto the dock, there was no dramatic rush, no running embrace. They simply stood there, facing each other, time collapsing between them. He looked different.
Thinner.
More tired. but his eyes held something new: clarity. "You came back," Leo said, stating the obvious. Evan smiled. "I told you I'd try." Life did not magically simplify after that. Evan did not shed his past like an old coat. There were still calls, still obligations that pulled him away for days at a time. But he returned. Always returned. He rented a small place near the harbor at first, unwilling to assume anything. Elena did not invite him to stay. She waited. Trust had to be rebuilt, even when love remained. One evening, after Leo had fallen asleep, Evan stood on the porch with Elena, the cold biting at their fingers. "I'm done working for people who decide who deserves to exist," he said. "I'm starting something new. Consulting on my terms. Transparent. Legal." She studied him carefully. "And if it doesn't work? Then I fail," he said calmly. "But I fail honestly." That answer mattered more than any promise. Spring came slowly. Briar Cove woke again. Tourists returned. The guest house filled. Life expanded. Evan became part of the town not by force, but by presence. He helped with repairs, coached Leo's football team when the original coach fell ill, listened more than he spoke. People stopped watching him so closely. He stopped watching exits. One afternoon, Elena found him at the beach, standing where she had first seen him months before. "You survived," she said. "So did you," he replied. That summer, Evan asked Elena to marry him. Not with spectacle or grand declarations. Just the two of them, sitting on the rocks as the sun dipped low. "I don't know how to promise you safety," he said, "but I can promise you honesty, effort, and a life where you are never an afterthought." Elena did not answer immediately. She watched the waves, thought of storms and quiet mornings, of fear and choice. "Yes," she said. They married in Briar Cove, under an open sky, with the sea as witness. Leo walked between them, beaming. Mrs. Lang cried openly. The lighthouse blinked once at dusk, as if in approval. Evan did not become someone else. He became more himself. And Elena did not lose the life she loved. She shared it. Years later, when Leo was older and the guest house buzzed with voices, Elena would sometimes wake early and stand at the window, coffee in hand, watching the calm sea. Evan would come up behind her, warm and solid, grounding. "We're lucky," he would say. "Yes," she would agree. Because they had chosen each other not out of rescue or escape, but out of understanding. And that, Elena knew, was the rarest kind of ending.